confirm as a council we welcome the use of the Welsh language within our public meetings, but I can confirm that we've not had or received any notifications or requests to use Welsh today. Therefore, the meeting will be conducted in English only. As a reminder, may I remind you that this meeting is being webcast. Therefore, can I ask that you turn off or silence your mobile phones and ensure you speak clearly into your microphones. Can I also remind members to sign the attendance register and confirm any apologies that have been received for this meeting? On to agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Can I ask if any members should have any declarations of interest that they declare them now? Thank you, members. Agenda item 3. Minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of March 2017. Just to remind members, these minutes relate to 2 reports on the progress and impact of accepted recommendations that were previously made to the executive member by the committee, and the progress made against adopted action plans that had previously been referred to the committee via audit committee. Can I ask members to scan through the minutes for accuracy and confirm that the minutes are accurate and are an accurate account of the meeting? Everyone okay and confirm the minutes of the previous meeting is okay? Yeah. Thank you. Agenda item 4. Update on the environmental enforcement pilot. The purpose of this report is to provide members with an update in relation to the environmental enforcement pilot initiative that commenced in May 2017 for 6 months, utilising members' choice funding. May I welcome Dave Thompson, Head of Public Protection, to provide a brief overview of the main points within the report. Over to you, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank the committee for postponing last time as well when I was unable to attend. I'm very grateful to still have the opportunity to speak to this report. I'd like to introduce to my left is Andrew Long. He's the team manager for the public health team. Members may recall that the authorities now in collaboration with Blanner went on public protection services, and Andrew and I came to the authority about a year ago, and Andrew is very much the officer on the ground for dealing with the enforcement initiative from a management perspective for the authority. There is one other thing before I go through the report to members, is that because of the postponement, some of the tables now we can that are in the report, we can give you some updated stats. Okay, so if you, I'll come to those as we go through the report. Thank you very much. If I take members through, I'll be as quick as I can. If we go to the bottom of page 1, which is item 4.1, really, the background to this really was that the authority previously utilised the local authority support service, which was X4 and then Kingdom, up to about 2014, and which was just after it made some dog control orders, and then it employed Kingdom to enforce the litter offences and the dog control order offences too. But that was discontinued a few years ago because it wasn't satisfactory for either party. As I said, we've been with the authority about a year now, and if we move over to one of the first things we did in October 16, this is paragraph 4.2, was to do a Safer Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And it had seen that with that gap, without any enforcement action, the authority and the committee made some recommendations in relation to bringing an enforcement pilot back. So if we move down the report, then really, I'll go straight to the issues and the findings. This is paragraph 7 onwards, really. Members' choices funding of £15,000 during budget setting that we all know about, and this was members approved this with a view to bring some officers to target the dog fouling or hotspot areas in particular. What happened then really is that what we were only able to purchase really on an hourly rate Kingdom officers, about 2 officers about 2 days a week, and Kingdom came back with an alternative, which was really we could have officers full time if there was a slightly different approach taken. And what their proposal was for under 7.1 was for 2 full-time enforcement officers for 6 months for the £15,000 worth of members' choices for funding. However, in doing that, obviously Kingdom would need to cover their costs, and they are a local authority support service, and they do need to make a living. So they were asking whether the authority would consider them retaining any of the income from the offences for which they serve fixed penalty notices. This was agreed by the chief officer, and as members will be know, there was a link to that report earlier in 4.3. The purpose really since May has been to target dog fouling hotspot areas, but also with offences for litter and obviously dog control order areas also. So what we did under 7.3 is we actually did some consultation. We were new officers into the authority, so we consulted those with a greater knowledge, and obviously there's no greater knowledge than her members at the time. So we wrote to members asking them for areas they wanted to nominate as hotspot areas that we want to patrol. 20 members responded, and also then we went through other officers and looked through records as well around complaints in relation to hotspot areas. We made contact with Pause on Patrol as well, which obviously they had a Gwent police contact and asked them to nominate some hotspot areas also. I'm not sure whether we had any responses from them or not. So when we look to implement the strategy, this is 7.4 now onwards, we actually found that there was some issues in relation to signage in the dog exclusion areas. We can't enforce any of the dog exclusion areas, which are the there are currently a lot of those areas in the borough. There's probably about 250 to 300, and as I'll say later on, we're in the process of reviewing those, and they'll come back to this committee in March. But a lot of them, we decided to focus on the main ones, which was the children's play areas, the sports pitches, and the park areas and things like that, really. Obviously school grounds as well. But a lot of them didn't have the adequate signage up, really, and we can't patrol and enforce on them. We can't enforce on them unless the signage is up there. That's a lesson we learned a while ago in our other authority. So we didn't actually realise that there really wasn't a lot of signage up there. So we had some great help from the enforcement team in public health, and we had to go out and do visits of 123 individual locations in 24 wards to determine whether the signage was adequate, and we had to correct that. At many locations it was found that it was either inappropriate or we had to take steps to actually just put signs up for the first time, and that required an investment from the service of £3,000. One of the other, it's not a difficulty, but it was a problem we hadn't encountered before, is that we don't control all these areas anymore because of the capital transfers, the community asset transfers of the sports pitches also. So we needed to approach those organisations who control those parcels of land to see if they wanted signage up there also. So I think there's 44 clubs and sports pitches, and only a few of those came back. But the vast majority of that work was completed by the end of July, but it did take us longer than we would have hoped. As far as other publicity, well, we did the usual stuff that's quick and simple to do. We did press releases, and we used social media and the website. And actually, our communications team are very good. This is paragraph 7.5, and they reckon there was about 25. Facebook and would have reached about 25,000 people in that respect. And I think a further call for information went on Facebook in August also, which also reached a similar amount of people. So getting into the patrols then, and utilising the staff level, utilising the information that we collated about the intelligence, about where the hotspot areas were and where we wanted to patrol. Andrew, the team manager, he provided the Kingdom officers with a list on a weekly basis of areas that we wanted them to target. And that's actually has been contained for you in Appendix 2, and as you'll see, there's quite a long list of areas there. I counted about 82 locations, and 2 locations were also highlighted by intelligence of needing patrols for litter as well. And as you'll see also, a number of areas were targeted for early and late patrols. The reason for that is really around dog fouling, is because many people walk their dogs in the early morning and the late evening, and we wanted to target hotspot areas at that time. And you'll see in Appendix 3 in the report then, there's basically we've got one enforcement officer at the moment. There's his report from around about the end of September and his observations there as well, really, of the things that he's witnessed. So really then it's talking about the enforcement outcomes. Now, obviously these were the outcomes presented to you as of the 31st of August, so we had time to draft the report for the meeting. But because of the delay in the meeting, I can give you some updates from you really. That actually we've had a total of 298 offences issued, offences witnessed where fixed penalty notices have been issued. I haven't got an update on the areas by location, so it has increased a little bit. I don't have the figure, sorry, as a breakdown in paragraph 7.71. I just know the total has increased. I can give you a further breakdown afterwards. So that's at the end of August anyway. There was 47 for dog exclusion orders, 2 for dog fouling, and 216 for litter. And that ratio wouldn't have changed too much with the 30-odd more that have been issued. Then we go into offences by location, really. And there's a table there to represent that. And I'll speak to these from paragraph 7.73 below there, really. We know that 81% of the witnessed offences have been for litter, and this reflects the trends experienced by other local authorities in Wales also, and on a national basis. Dog fouling offences especially are very difficult to witness to officers needing to be in the right place at the right time. And there are a high number of areas that are considered to be hotspots. Most people are aware that they should pick up and properly dispose of their dog's mess, and I think in the statement from the officer in Appendix 3, you'll see that actually he saw quite a high level of compliance. Actually, most dog owners are responsible. But in the main, dog fouling offences take place when no one is looking, and or as we've said, during the early mornings or to late evenings, when a lot of dog walks, but not all, take place. But we feel as though patrols at those times and promoting patrols at those times do have high value. You'll also note that there were 47 offences of dog exclusion impinging onto dog exclusion areas where the signage was adequate, and that's onto sports pitches and children's play areas, etc., mainly on sports pitches. Now, often you might see, well, that's actually quite a low rate, for actually the dog exclusion the dog fouling offences. But actually, when you look at it on a percentage basis, that data, because we've been targeting more dog fouling and dog hotspot areas and directing the officers where, it's actually a higher outcome than we do have in other areas, certainly a higher outcome than we've had in Blaenau Gwent as well, which has been 4.1%. But on that data, because of the targeting we've done, we've had 19% of offences witnesses. Now, as far as where these offences are taking place, as you'll see from the table, and there may be a question on this, why it's only north and south and mid-Torvine, they're unable to break it down for us by ward at this point in time. I think that we can try and get it broken down by approximate area, but it won't necessarily be by ward a basis. So we've only presented the information as north, mid and south at this point in time. Just a word on the Kingdom staffing then. You know, obviously we with the Chief Officer approval at the time, we agreed to go with the strategy of trying to get a bigger presence all week. However, we're actually down to one officer at this point in time. One of the Kingdom enforcement officers left the company in July, and there is now only one officer operating in the county borough, but the focus has remained on that officer on dog fouling and dog control order hotspot areas. And that's why there isn't the same increase in offences being witnessed at this time. And we decided that really we can get him full time now on the 15,000 a year for the remainder of the project, for the remainder of the pilot until the end of October, until we decide whether we're going to extend or not. So on the payment of fines, then 7.9 further down, members will see that we've got some data there really, and I can give updates on this. The outcome summary under 7.91, there's actually 204 offences, offences that were witnessed with the fixed penalty notice paid. There are 39 offences where the offence was witnessed and the fixed penalty notice is still due to be paid, the fine. When it refers to written off there, that's written off by Kingdom. What that actually means is it's either cancelled by the local authority or it's been put forward for prosecution. Because if the prosecution takes place, obviously the fine is not paid through to the local authority or Kingdom. If they're found guilty in court, of course, a prosecution fine at court is kept by the court when it's paid, and we get costs if they're awarded in due course. So that's what it means by written off there, and there's some a couple were cancelled as well for other reasons. And then fixed penalty, the table further down, you'll see it's on the methods of payment. It's now 73 by automated telephone line. Call centres remained at 7. Cash at the council office is 1. Online has increased to 57, and use of pay points is 66. We've now got 40, if we move over the page, as far as I have it here anyway, members, onto page 6, the remainder of the table, we've now got 40 cases referred to prosecution, although none have been completed yet. There isn't a court date for those yet. Still a few cancelled by the local authority. Mental illness, and there's other reasons there for not pursuing a case, and those have not really changed too much since the 31st of August. So we've actually got a payment rate for the fines for the offences that have been witnessed and the fixed penalty fines that have been issued, a payment rate of about 70%. That's based on the August figures. I haven't updated that. And this does compare actually favourably with other local authority areas. It's quite a good payment rate, that. When it comes to not needing to take the cases to court and people accepting that they've committed the offence. And then I've got a few words there just to confirm that it actually takes several months to take a case to court. So really, there is quite a long still, and during that time, for the majority of that period, those who've received a fine for committing an offence can still make the payment. Okay. So one of the things we wanted to touch on then is how it's been received in the public. Obviously, we've been here before. We introduced this in Blaenau Gwent in 2011. And it was, very, very challenging at the start, and we learned a lot from that. And to some extent, the same has happened here. People, when they're issued, because they've been caught on an offence and they're issued with a fixed penalty fine, that they can be that they can be quite outraged, and obviously they can make complaints either directly to us or even to yourselves as members and others. So we've always been getting a small number of queries direct to officers. I'm on 7.95 really. Because we started to put the signage up, and of course we were outraged, as I referred to. There was some confusion over which zones were dog exclusion zones also. And on a few cases where we did get representations made, and we did accept that there was genuine confusion there, then we did rescind the ticket. I know I usually dread Andrew going on holiday because it means I get them all, the ones he gets, and I had a few when he was away on holiday, and it was appropriate to rescind them, and Andrew obviously deals with them more on a regular basis. And just really to say again that the dog exclusion zones that have been in for a few years are under review. And one of the things we'll do there is we're going to probably decrease them significantly, because a lot of them are unenforceable, and obviously we need to put better signage up there and more appropriate signage too. So 7.96 then, members. As the pilot has progressed, inquiries and complaints have continued. It is normal. And as I said, it is to be expected that offenders will become upset and outraged. But I think at the same time we've got to remember that most people haven't complained to us. Most people probably haven't complained to members as well. And there is a high payment rate also. And that's probably due to the fact that there's been a gap in enforcement for about 3 or so years as well. So initially they'll contact the fixed penalty notice administrator, and because of the collaboration on public protection and the long-standing sort of local authority support service in Blaenau Gwent, we've used Blaenau Gwent's administrator to deal with Torfaen inquiries as well. And very often offenders will make allegations to us and to yourselves, you may have received some, about how they've been treated by the officer. That perhaps there's been a bit of aggression there and just generally being unfairly treated. But we need to remind members that they do wear body cams. And those body cams, whilst they don't witness the offence, they turn the body cam on then. And what is witnessed is the dialogue between the person. And of all the offences I've ever been asked to review, we go to especially around aggression, alleged aggression, we go to, or other parts of the offence that, the sort of counter arguments. You can go to the evidence and you can actually see, and of all the ones I've had to review, I've not upheld a complaint in relation to that. The officers are very professional. They do explain who they are. They do explain what they are doing, and that's all recorded. And that can be used in court as well, because very often they'll use that as a defence in court. And very often the officer will then speak to the person. In one case we had, and they'll say, "I've just watched you walk over the football pitches." And he'll say, "Yes, I did," and that's witnessed on the camera offence there as well. So that dialogue is quite important. So, and again, the officers are trained to act courteously and professionally. So we do get a few instances referred to us, and obviously they'll refer to yourselves as members, and they even go to the MP and the AM once and so we do deal. But actually, up until the 31st of August, there was only about 10 cases that had actually got that far for review with us. So it is comparatively few, although when you're dealing with them, it can sometimes feel that there is quite a lot. There was one, I'm on 7.98 now, members. There's one specific complaint from the communications team who reported, not from them, but they passed it on to us, around a gentleman one of the team who was recorded on Facebook and photographed with a mobile phone in Cumbrand shopping centre, and all sorts of allegations were made on that. But that complaint wasn't upheld, and once we had a look into that. The communications team did confirm that the pilot was widely discussed on social media, but to date the council, or as at the 31st of August, the council hadn't received many queries via its own social media channels. And they did report some anecdotal intelligence to us, which we thought was quite interesting, and we wanted to let members know that certainly there was some frustration within the dog walking community, that they felt they were being targeted. And I'm using the words that were passed over to us here, while other problems such as antisocial behaviour, fly tipping, littering, etc., seemingly go unchallenged. And it's interesting that, because it's about perception, isn't it, really? Because the data we've presented, as I say, further down on that paragraph, we've served quite a lot of litter offences. And we have a very good record, both Blaenau Gwent and Torfaen, for prosecuting for fly tipping. We have a zero tolerance approach, in the sense that where we have enough evidence to prosecute, we prosecute, and we get some good outcomes in court. So really then it sort of begs the question as well, have the patrols been successful? And once Andrew and I sat down and thought about this, really, it was well, and we drew on our Blaenau Gwent experience, which I referred to later in the paragraph. After only 4 months, we think it's too early to assess the impact. Clearly, there have been a good number of offences, if it is the right word, because we're trying to drive them down. But there are a number of offences that have been witnessed, and this is very positive and will serve as a detriment effect as word gets around. And this should increase as time goes on. In other words, the word getting around, because as the prosecutions come through, then we can publicise those in court, and we do that. And that helps to act as a further deterrent. Another way to assess the outcomes is the number of dog fouling complaints that we're getting in the area, received by the authority. And this is a difficult one to do at an early stage, because actually we would have thought that there would have been more, because we've raised the profile of it a little bit. We've asked people, we waited for people to make complaints through. So we would have thought that there would have been more, but as we go over the page, we'll see that actually when we did a statistical comparison, if you like, we were getting an average of 22 a month in 16, 17, and so far since the pilot up until the end of August, we were getting about 15 a month. So they have reduced, but we're not necessarily saying the problem with dog fouling is we see it on the ground, and we're all outraged by it and we want to do something about it, but what we don't see enough, and what's hard to catch, is the actual offenders who are doing it. The easy part is to clear it up and to clean it up, but actually catching people doing it and taking that deterrent effect is the difficult part, as I referred to earlier. But we wanted to convey some data then about our experience from Blaenau Gwent, where, as I said, this has been now running for nearly 6 years, over 6 years perhaps. And we've seen the number of recorded complaints for dog fouling, complaints to environmental health, is that cleansing as well, Andrew? Yeah, and cleansing as well, has decreased over time from 1,100 or so complaints in 13-14 down to 300 in 15-16. And it's a hard one to measure with any real accuracy. But I know that after the first year, a lot of our members were saying to us, anecdotally, the streets seemed cleaner after we'd started to publicise a zero tolerance approach to enforcement action. So if the authority wants to take that zero tolerance approach, in line with the clean and green strategy that is a core priority for Torfaen, we may have to stick with it for a few years. So really, in relation to the continuation of the pilot, which is what we're seeking your views on, amongst other things, we also need to consider the effect of, if we discontinue the initiative at the end of the month, is it likely that the limited environmental health gains that there may have been will be lost? There'd be no other significant deterrent effect in the borough from, and it's probably unlikely that littering and dog fouling will reduce further. And obviously we've put a lot of time and effort into it, but this is a policy issue for the authority.
And just in 7.13 then really, some words around the reputational side, etc. To discontinue the pilot may attract wider criticism for the authority. Little or no enforcement of litter dropping or the current dog control orders since 2014 has resulted in increasing concern from elected members and complaints from the general public, the businesses and others. We do spend about £2.5 million a year. Now that's the figure that Street Scene have given me. It's difficult to break down, and it includes a number of things, but it includes obviously cleansing for litter and dog fouling, fly tipping, bin emptying, grass cutting, and a few other bits and bobs too. Perhaps something to do with cemeteries as well. And we're investing a lot in cleaning up, but we need to consider, I think, as an authority, how we want to deal with these environmental crimes that are in line with our clean, and what our strategy is going to be in line with the clean and green Torvine priority. We also need to think about the dog control orders, the dog exclusion zones that we're dealing with here also. Because if we're not going to have an enforcement presence with them, then, one has to question whether are we really, is there any benefit in having them? We could still have a dog control order for dog fouling, which is borough-wide in open spaces. But really, these dog exclusion areas, if we're not going to have an enforcement presence there. And that's reflected with the anecdotally, with the work that officers have been doing as part of that review. And the public consultation of that review is scheduled for November. So all members will be written to at that time. But really, when we've been, I referred to those community asset transfer organisations earlier, and when we've been talking to them about, do you want to have your pitches as designated as a dog exclusion area under what will be then a public space protection order, they're saying to us yes, but they're saying to officers yes, but there's no point if there's no enforcement. So what are the alternatives then at 7.14 now, the members? If the authority needs to consider what the alternative options are if it chooses not to commit to an extension of the pilot, that will lead to a later time to the development of a cost-effective and sustainable enforcement strategy, which is what the safer scrutiny a year ago wanted us to look at also. So should we review the dog exclusions? Should the review of the dog exclusions be aborted? Should they be repealed if they're not going to be enforced? Obviously, we don't necessarily want this as officers, but we just wanted to put these forward as discussion points. Should the dog control order related to dog fouling be repealed if it's not going to be enforced? Does the authority wish to move away from a zero tolerance policy towards the above offences and litter dropping? Should the authority focus its resources only in services that deal with the cleansing part of it? So the next few paragraphs really cover a lot of the areas we've already chosen around consultation that's taken place with elected members, and obviously under 8.1, if the pilot is to be extended, Chair, then really we'll try and do some more work about a public information film which has been asked for, a YouTube thing to say we're enforcing, we are going to be taking a proactive approach to enforcement. And again, I talked then further about the review and the views we've received so far. Just a few final points, Chair, really, on the policy under points, under section 9 of the report, the policy side of it, clean and green Torvine is a policy priority for the authority. Under 9.3, under the financial implications, we'll probably be making a recommendation to the executive member after taking scrutiny's views that really we need to make another £15,000 available to take the pilot to the end of the financial year. And just another thing there on personnel members also. At the moment there's one person employed as a result of this who is likely to be a redundancy if we discontinue the pilot. But really the bigger picture is that one of the plus sides of what we've had in the neighbouring authority for so many years, we've actually employed 5 local people to do this, and it's been a self-sustaining policy, very little financial cost, net cost of the authority of about £4,000 to £10,000 a year, depending on obviously the number of prosecutions a year and the number of tickets issued. Finally, just another word about the business community there under 9.8. Really, the policy implications for them. Local businesses should benefit from the development of a more sustainable enforcement strategy that contributes to a cleaner and safer environment and make the county borough a more attractive place to visit. Now, this may be a question, and I'm expecting it to be. There's been quite a bit of talk around enforcement on private land, private shopping centres, and places like that. We don't do that we don't ask the local authority support service to do that without the permission of the landowners. But it's the local authority who is the principal litter authority. Other authorities can be as well, like town councils. A lot of those businesses ask us, like Tesco's or other supermarkets. You'll notice there was a fixed penalty notice issued for dog fouling on a fast food area also. A lot of these businesses asked us to enforce there because they want some support for the issues on their land. I'd ask members to consider a policy position around people visiting the area and the impression that the area that it gives if there's high levels of litter in these areas. A lot of these private organisations do employ their own litter pickers, but they don't enforce, obviously. I think that, I don't know if that is an issue that was going to be raised, but if it is an issue, I begin to think it is. If there is an issue, our recommendation as officers is for the authority to take a slightly more strategic approach to litter control, and the statement that a zero tolerance approach can make wherever it's applied and wherever we as the local authority, the principal littering authority, are able to enforce there also. That's it really, Chair. Everything else I think is largely just repeated. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak, and we'll take any questions.
Okay, members, any questions for Dave?
On the first one, originally on 15,000 we were paying for 2 officers. We're now paying the same amount for 1 officer. Is there going to be any money coming back to the council regarding that? And the second one is a lot of these dog control areas, the signage is poor and too high up, particularly for the elderly and the disabled. And by not addressing the clean-up, it's left to the neighbourhood services at a cost to the council. And number 4, are we conducting with dog clubs about the way forward to perhaps police this? And the fifth one, are we going to use the partnership with organisations to share the cover and the financial costs if we decide to proceed?
Thank you, Chair. £15,000, which was initially for 2 officers, was for 2 days a week. And what the alternative that was put forward by Kingdom that was agreed is that we'd have 2 officers 5 days a week, but obviously with the agreement that they would need to keep any fine income as a result of offences. With it going down to 1, what we've agreed is that officer will stay full-time for the £15,000 a year, and he is being targeted only to dog fouling areas. So we don't anticipate any rebate on that.
My only concern is when you come back on that one, where you've got 2 people, you've got 2 people in 2 different areas.
Yeah.
Where you've got 1, you're now static in 1 area.
Yeah.
We acknowledge that, but as I said, that's the reason it's been kept as it is. We haven't expected them to a large number of litter offences were witnessed in the first when there was two officers. What we've said to them is, look, let's keep it at one until we know we're going to extend the pilot, because that was their concern, and it's one we discussed with the executive member and agreed. But his targeting is now only to the dog fouling and the dog exclusion areas. The second question was about the post signage. Well, we mentioned in the report that yes, we had to do a lot of work around the signage, and we've targeted the signage to sports grounds and children's play areas and schools where they have requested it. Is it too high? It's got to be a certain height, because then otherwise we'll be getting complaints about health and safety risks and people hitting themselves on it or something like that. So it is over a certain height. Whether it's too high or not, I guess, is a matter of opinion. But I take on board your comments, and we'll consider that. So I didn't quite catch the third question about cleaning up.
Well, if the dog fouling is not being cleared up, and they're not producing the fines, then the cost is left to the council to clean up through neighbourhood services. So how are we going to address that? So really, we're awarding more costs to the council by neighbourhood services having to clean up the dog fouling that's left.
Yeah, it seems to be a vicious circle, really, because we need a bigger enforcement presence, and we need to catch more people to reduce the amount of dog fouling there, really. But as I said, when it comes to the cost then of the clearance, with the models that we've got experience of elsewhere, the income that does come back to the authority, and I say income, it's not just fines, it's court costs as well, that does eventually come back to the authority, is actually utilised to have that greater to sustain the enforcement presence in the area. And the issue is this: is that we've got experience where over time we've managed to bring it more or less cost neutral. It fluctuates, but it's usually £4,000 to £10,000 net cost. But if we were to employ those people directly and take a less zero tolerance approach and etc., then to have 4 people plus an administrator in the area, you're looking at a growth item of about 150,000. So we've not got the experience where we've generated enough to subsidise clearance, the cleansing side. So far, we've only been able to generate enough funding to be able to sustain the enforcement presence for 4 or 5 years. The next one was then dog clubs. Dog clubs, we did make contact with Paws on Patrol and speak to them, and I'm not sure we had any. Did we have anything back? Yeah, we asked them based for information of hotspot areas, and they didn't come back to us to do that. But I think your question was around helping us spread the word or enforcement. Yeah.
Approach to deal with the situation of dog fouling and the issues that people with dogs got. It's a way of getting outside.
I think that we can make a little bit. We can have a try again with dogs clubs. We haven't got a list of dogs clubs. We're aware that there's a couple of organisations, and we did approach Paws on Patrol, and we could help to spread the word. Really, we could certainly take their ideas on how we could spread the word there. Whether that leads to further enforcement action is a difficulty, though, as also because very often they don't know who it is. The enforcement officer may not be there. People who witness an offence and know who the perpetrator is may not be inclined to make complaints and name that person and then provide a witness statement and eventually go to court. That often is something that's quite off-putting to people. So whether that leads to more enforcement action is unlikely, but what it could do is help us to promote that we're taking a zero tolerance approach, and we'd certainly have a look at that. Sorry, Chair, the final one was about partnership, and I didn't quite catch that one again.
All I was going to say, if we use another partnerships, and we were going to proceed, if we were going to proceed with this, would they be willing to share operational and costs to implement clean up their areas rather than just using our service to clean up their paths?
Oh, right. Okay, so you're meaning by that, we're talking about the private landowner side, yeah, right. Okay. Well, as I said, I mean, we can certainly try to encourage private businesses who have land and car parks and things like that to litter pick their own land and clean it up. But I think that's a good idea, and I think a lot of them do. Whether I don't know if anybody runs a business here, but if you're a shopkeeper and if you had a piece of car park outside the front of your property, you may pick up a bit of litter now and then, but I don't think somebody who's spent money in your shop, you'd want to go out and give them a fixed penalty notice for littering if you had the power to do so, because I don't think there'd be a returning customer if you did that. And that's really an issue there, really. I think when it comes to private businesses, and when we talked about thinking a little bit more strategically as a local authority about it, is one of the issues is of course shopping centres, shops, fast food chains, supermarkets. They employ people in our area and they help sustain the local economy, and they are major contributors to the local economy, and they pay their rates, and I suppose they pay for local authority services as well, really. And really there is an issue there around, do we give them support to help them keep their areas clean as well by way of enforcement action, which reinforces the zero tolerance approach that we want to take as an authority, gets the message out that we as a local authority have a tough clean and green strategy, and part of that is a zero tolerance approach to environmental offences. Litter dropping, dog control orders, and fly tipping as well, really, which as I said, is an increasing problem also. I'm not quite sure I would want to if I was a shopkeeper, I would want to enforce those offences if I had the power to do so in my head.
Thank you. I know there are a number of questions. Councillor Mills, I think you were next.
Thanks. Couple of things. Where you're saying on the annex, where you're saying the local areas where they've been, I was one of the members that responded, right? And the areas that are shown on there were not the areas I asked for, so that obviously never worked. You're talking about complaints. Can I suggest to you that the reasons you're getting less complaints, because residents just accept it now. People, when I've had residents come up to me, and I've been around for a long time here, they come up to me and complain about dog mess. I say, well, have you put in a complaint? They say, what's the point? Nothing gets done. So therefore, that's why complaints are going down, because they just think, what is the point? All right? When I, again, talk to residents and I explain about this system, and I ask them, have you seen anybody in the area? I've not had one person in my ward who says that they've seen anybody going around. So, yeah. So therefore I have reservations whether they've actually been where they said they've been. You talked about best practice, and you said about one authority that's actually employed somebody. Can you give us some more information on that? Because if that's more cost effective, I would much rather go down that route. And the last one, you've sort of talked about it already, but I would think if we're actually going on to private areas like shops and private car parks of shops and Tesco's, and for instance, if they're expecting us to enforce it on their land, well, surely they should pay for it. I don't see why we should pay, and I say we, I'm talking about the taxpayer to go on and give out and enforce fines on private land when they're making a huge profit, because we're enhancing their businesses. Okay.
Yeah, and I understand, on the last point first then, I understand the view there really, that there is a difference of opinion perhaps amongst quite a few people on that one. We caught...
Don't think so.
Oh, right, okay. Perhaps between officers and members then. There was a dog fouling offence found on a fast food chain car park in the report. It's not about just that, to me, from an officer perspective who's an environmental health officer, that's not just about visual cleanliness, that's about public health and the risk of disease. And, you know, that is a place where a lot of children go. And, you know, my principle that I'm trying to persuade you of, perhaps not very well, is that we have a duty as a local authority that's broader than just our own land and highways and areas, and that, you know, there are public health issues there, and to take it, yes, they can clean it up, but they've no powers to enforce. So my point is, we're the policing authority. This may be not the right analogy, but if somebody's caught shoplifting in a shop and they ring the police don't say, I'm sorry, I can't come because it's happened on private land. Our view, my view, and Andrew will speak for himself, but I know he agrees with me, is these are offences that have been committed in our area that reflect on us as a local authority, that we are responsible for policing. We don't have a statutory duty to do this. We have the power, and it's whether we choose to do it or not. So there are other ways of looking at it, and it reflects on our borough, on people coming to our area. And as I said, you know, who keeps the fine? Where does the fine go if they're paying for it? Do we keep the fine then, or what? What we found in other areas is that whilst there is some focus on private land, and the other thing I would say as well, to try to persuade you, is that if you've got a big supermarket car park with lots of litter on it, on a breezy day, that'll blow off. It'll blow off onto our highways, onto our footpaths, into other parts of our area as well. So, you know, it doesn't always stay where it is what I'm saying there. So that's an alternative opinion on that one, on the private land. As far as the...
I'm sorry, just if I can come in. Before you go on that, have we, as an authority, actually asked these businesses to make a financial contribution? Have we even attempted to ask them, or do we just take it for granted the taxpayer will pay?
In the area where we've had a more established local authority support service, we haven't asked them to do that. They have requested, or sometimes they've said, no, I don't want you to come here because of the way it reflects on their business. And sometimes they've at times asked us, Andrew will confirm this. But they do ask us to go on, and they do ask to enforce on their land. And in that area, we haven't done that because of the way, once the offences are witnessed, the way the fines are paid in, and the way that model is set up is it helps sustain our service to deliver it in the area. Okay? So, you did ask a question about a local authority that's employed people directly. I think perhaps I wasn't clear then, and I apologise. What I was saying was, in the other model that we've got, that we've worked with for a long time, it is a local authority support service, which is the same support service that we've got here. And as a result of having that embedded and sustained, it's sustained 5 people, local people working in the area. It's created 5 jobs, not directly by the council, but 5 jobs by way of the local authority support service. Some authorities do employ them directly, but they are less reliant on witnessing lots of offences, and they take what I would describe as that less of a zero tolerance approach. But that requires then a financial, a revenue budget, financial contribution from and the other authority where I think do other things as well, don't they? I'm thinking of Caerphilly.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's worth just identifying the difference between the way the models run in Blaenau Gwent and the way it is in Torfaen. We employed 4 enforcement officers in Blaenau Gwent, and 2 of those officers paid on an hourly rate. So we actually direct them, it's not imperative to them as Kingdom staff to issue fixed penalty notices to make, the whole scheme profitable effectively, because they can patrol all day and not issue a fixed penalty notice, because Kingdom's still getting that hourly rate. So that enables us to direct those officers to areas where there's low levels of offending, such as dog fouling areas, where they may spend 6-7 hours patrolling and not witnessing an offence. The other 2 officers then are employed on a basis of the Kingdom get a percentage of any fixed penalty notice that they issue. So the fine at the moment in Blaen y Gwent is £125 with a reduction to £100 if it's paid within 14 days. And Kingdom get £45 of that, whatever ticket they issue out of that fixed penalty notice. So in conjunction with all of the income we get from the fixed penalty notices that Kingdom issue, and we get all of the costs from the notices issued by the hourly paid staff. Kingdom don't get any percentage of that, and the percentage that we get from the fixed penalty notices that are issued and for the litter patrols, plus our court costs, means that effectively the whole service is cost neutral, give or take. And we issued, I think it was about 1,700 fixed penalty notices last year. As Dave has highlighted in the report, I take on board your point about maybe there's complete fatigue and people feel that nothing's getting done, but the reduction from 1,100 complaints a year we were getting when we started the pilot to a quarter of that almost now, it does indicate that it is having an effect on the sort of level of offending on the streets. So that is an alternative model that we use in Blaen y Gwent, and it does give us that balance between needing to get some income in to make the service self-sustaining, but also giving us control about directing staff to areas of offending which are not so prolific, and therefore there won't be so many fixed penalty notices issued.
To that also, though, that took a few years to get it to that self-sustaining model, because at the start you don't have the court costs coming in, because you've not prosecuted anybody. And it's when you prosecute people, which is always a lag in time, and then it's heard in court, and then usually the court will issue their fines, and then the costs, and then the people are usually given a long time to pay. So it's increased every year, court costs coming in back towards it. It must come back to the service, because then you can show it almost like a trading account on it. It must come back to the service, but it sort of has increased every year, the amount of court costs that we get back. And there was another complaint about the dog mess, wasn't there, at the start? Councillor, I think Andrew covered that really. He was, the issue about the complaint fatigue. So if there's any further questions.
Thank you.
No, sorry. You haven't answered the question when I said that I was one of the members that responded and sent you in an area, and you've actually patrolled 2 areas where I said there wasn't a problem, and you've ignored the ones I asked for.
Can we ask you afterwards to provide us with those areas? We apologise for that. Obviously, there's been some confusion there, and we'll certainly add them to this there.
Thank you. The next, Councillor Jones.
Yeah, it isn't included on the back of this report. I'd have to check on the back of the others. I think it was criticised previously by another councillor, wasn't it? Was that of the report to the chief officer? Yeah. Where there was one on there where it was whether we can improve on it or not. Then we'll certainly try to do that.
I think guide dogs of the blind are exempt from going on those areas, obviously, for obvious reasons. And, you know, when you go back to the table under 7.92, and there's some of the reasons that some of the fines have been written off, then you know, there are some medical issues there.
It takes a while though to get to that stage. It's quite difficult for those vulnerable people when they're going through all the processes to get
Yeah.
to
Yeah. Well, I'm going to pass to Andrew because he deals with these on a more regular basis. The one I dealt with where there was confusion about a cricket pitch, and that was around the signage. Yes, it was. I don't think it was necessarily anybody who had a disability, but certainly she had a lively dog that ran onto the cricket pitch there. Because the signage wasn't adequate, we looked at the whole case and we rescinded the ticket. Andrew will probably give you a few examples where the disability issues have been very much taken on board.
Yeah, I mean, I receive a lot of representations from individuals. Sorry. I receive a lot of representations from individuals who have, you know, mental health issues and physical issues, and we look at all of those considerations when determining whether to rescind a fixed penalty notice or not. Sometimes that's supported by social workers or health workers or doctors, people who are, you know, with these vulnerable individuals who are usually have some sort of interaction with an organisation who can advise them on what they need to do, what steps they need to take to approach us, and then we look at those individual circumstances and rescind the notice. We're currently reviewing the enforcement policy for the public protection team, and in part of that policy there is consideration to vulnerable adults and mental health issues and physical disability. So, you know, if an individual who is vulnerable has received a fixed penalty notice and we become aware of that, I mean, the enforcement officer, they are trained to be, you know, to ensure that any individual who is vulnerable shouldn't be given that notice, you know, or at least they should be making a referral to us as the line managers to consider the circumstances around those individual cases. So there are checks and balances in the system from the point of view of the interaction with the enforcement officer with that individual, and then if that individual is vulnerable and they approach us directly or through contact with relatives or other support organisations, then we do consider their personal circumstances in whether to enforce that notice or otherwise.
I understand that, but I also think that there are some cases where people have had their disability completely seen by other bodies, and they would get themselves into a terrible knot trying to deal with this, and it could impact on them in a very difficult way, you know. And I think £100 is a lot of money for some people who have income benefits or whatever, and it can be the difference between eating and not paying the fine and then it getting worse and all sorts of things. So to me, it is a bit like when there's only 2 dog fouling things on this table. It's a bit like a sledgehammer to crack a nut, and I am a little bit worried as well about a couple of years back there were wheel clamping companies that were used, and they tend to go over the top and they became toxic to the public, and I don't want Torvine to be looked at as having anything with a third-party company that makes us look too heavy-handed in certain areas. And by what I've heard, I feel that's where Kingdom might be taking us.
No, it's a valued comment really, because it's obviously a concern that, as we've heard from other areas, and it's been widespread elsewhere, and we've heard the car parking issues, the civil parking. I think though that it goes back to, whilst we take on board everything you say there, and the perception issues, and some of those, the way people feel about it, as Andrew has mentioned, that there is an appeal process in place, and we try to look as even-handedly at every case as we can. But when it comes back to then the policy decision and how we can fund a service, then that's the tough nut to crack here really, because we're in a very difficult financial climate, and what this model that Andrew referred to a minute ago, that's been running for many years, does is it reinforces the local authorities' zero tolerance, but it demonstrates it.
But at the same time, members have to understand that we're never, ever going to catch every single offence, ever. We're never going to catch dog fouling very late at night that's not been cleansed. We're only going to have one officer at the moment, 2 recently, 4 in the next door local authority who can't be in the places where all the offences are taken. So the approach we've got there reinforces our zero tolerance approach, and it does it in a cost effective way. The alternative is, do we want to have an enforcement approach? And if we want to have an enforcement approach that doesn't then deliver the high detection rate of offences, and that's what they are, they're offences. I know people feel like there's a little bit, it's unfair targeting, but they're offences. No one should, and does, get a fixed penalty notice if they do not commit an offence. So, obviously there are circumstances behind that, but it's how do we fund that? And the other option, if we want to have 4 officers, for example, is to consider a different approach, which is less zero tolerance, that meets the concerns of perception that members have, and is perhaps a bit more educational as well. But that is a growth item for the local authority, because we will not be able to rely on that circle of income from offences, whether it be fines paid or court costs received afterwards. So that's the difficult choice that we will be giving to, obviously, the executive member after we've taken the views of scrutiny.
Do you have a third question?
I did have a third question, and that was, I have some canal down by where I live, and that is never patrolled, and there's a lot of dog fouling that goes on there. I think it's only a few dogs, but I know that there's dog fouling and litter goes on there. Would people, whoever's doing it, whether it's an outside company that we've picked to share this with, would the people who do it go to other areas, not just the ones that they're going to now? Because to me, it's certain places they're going to continue to walk and do things they shouldn't be doing. Thanks for that. Would it be cheaper to do it in-house, do you think?
If you look at annual cost of an officer who's an enforcement officer, then you're looking at scale 6 or 7. You're probably looking at a net cost of £35,000 a year for one, with on costs. I'm guessing a little bit. I'd have to check. So basically, you multiply that out by however many officers we can afford. But if we then want to say, look, we want you to focus on this. We want litter and dog control order offences and dog fouling. Then we've demonstrated that those are difficult to catch, and so we cannot be reliant on the fine income to be able to offset the cost of employing those officers.
Thank you.
Make one word. What generates the cost? Let's be honest here. What generates the cost effectiveness of all the models that are non-directly employed is hotspot areas for litter, which is where crowds of people are, and where they can witness lots of offences during the day. And that is how it can be reinforces the zero tolerance approach, but that is how it can become cost effective.
The next councillor that indicated was Councillor Thomas.
Thanks for that, Chair. Dave, in your report, 7.74, you say that you're unable to get a breakdown of the offences by ward. I find this vitally important that we've got that, especially since you just mentioned about hotspot areas. If you add that data, then surely you would know more accurately your hotspot areas. So I just find it a little bit strange that you haven't got that data.
But we can...
Yeah, I did ask them. I think the problem is with the wards is that when because they use electric handheld devices to generate the fixed penalty notice, when they put the street in there, sometimes these streets actually go into a different ward. So it's difficult for them to delineate on their system where the offence, actually ward-wise, where the offence had actually taken place. Not this is a national problem that they have, that they're looking at as far as their system is concerned. So you may have a street that leads into another ward and they mark on their system which street it is, but that street may also be connected into another ward. So at the moment they can't drill down to ward level. They can drill down to street level, but they couldn't give us that in relation to wards because the system's not set up to do that. They are looking at the problem, but they haven't cracked it quite yet.
And that's on so you're saying that's it's on a handheld device, yeah? So they don't keep a pocketbook of them and write it down then where this happens, so they can, mark it down accurately. So, you're on about hotspot areas. If you're collecting the data accurately, you're going to know exactly where you're going. I don't understand why you can't break it down by ward. I just find that a bit strange,
It's the system that Kingdom have got.
Fixed penalty notice to identify, if you wanted it could be done, but it would mean trawling through every fixed penalty notice, basically.
But that way you're going to find your hotspot areas, aren't you?
Thank you, Councillor. And the next councillor that's indicated is Councillor Dew.
I think a lot of it is down to education of the people, and we've got a lot of walks up in Abersecon area where you walk it, there's no bins for people to put their mess in, it's just plastic bags with dogs' messes chucked on the floor at the end of the walks, because there's no bins there. But we need a lot more bins in here. You have signs on your bins, people are seeing these things, they're thinking, things are being done, but at the moment they see nothing's being done.
Thank you. I'm sure. I mean, we're not the cleansing side, so we can't comment. But I'm sure if you wanted to pass over to Steve afterwards, any areas he can instruct staff elsewhere to action the point you've raised in that locality. But the general point is a common one, and it's a well-made point that around, it's not just about enforcement, it's not just about cleansing, it's trying to encourage it with appropriately sited receptacles as well. And regular emptying. I don't know if emptying is an issue at the moment as well, but I was on holiday in Cornwall, lovely part of the area, spoilt by a dog bin where people are complying, but then it's not being emptied often enough, and that's got its own public health issues then as well as odour issues as well.
And Councillor Hawler.
I'd like to agree with Councillor Mills that we are the boots on the ground, and from my experience, these boots on the ground are not finding anything like a 75% reduction in the actual dog mess. You might be having 75% less reported, but you mentioned earlier there was you're thinking of doing a YouTube presentation. I'm quite interested in that because I think that anything that promotes what we're actually trying to do throughout the ward is accessible and can be shared on various Facebook groups is a good idea. Could you expand on that, please?
We haven't worked up. We'll if we get the go-ahead to extend the pilot, we'll work with comms, who are very good, and we'll look to almost it'll either be. I think Andrew's got much of a better face for video than I have, but it'll be one of us or the enforcement officer who will be saying, look, these are what the signs look like, we're targeting these areas, and just to promote the fact that we have an enforcement initiative there, really. That was the idea that actually came from
one of your colleagues who's not on the committee today, but it actually came from a referral we had in there, and it's something that I know the cabinet members are very keen on also. So if we get to extend the pilot, we'll put something together which is appropriate and informative.
Secondly, going back to the Facebook kind of thing, we've got a Facebook thread here that we have in front of us, and just scanning through, I won't pick on the individual, but there's, when you see someone who's high profile and is on a Facebook group and is being picked out as a repeat offender in a very high profile area, surely are we picking up on that kind of thing?
I assume you feel easy. We had some intelligence about this problem. Apparently it's occurring daily, so the enforcement officer actually went to view some CCTV footage about 2 days ago now, I think, from the control centre. We've identified the individual, and he'll be having a fixed penalty notice for the offence. So, yeah.
Good. Thank you. And Councillor Mills, I think you want to...
Just two more I've thought of on there. Have you looked at what other local authorities are actually doing, not just in Wales but throughout the UK, to look at best practice? And the other thing is, at the moment the contract is with Kingdom. Have you looked at other companies that could provide a service to compare with what they can do?
We actually, the second point first really, we've gone through a tendering process in Blaen y Gwent about 3 years ago now, and there was only two, well, it was actually, I think it was only Kingdom actually submitted a complete and confident bid for the tender. I am aware there is another company that operates, I think in Swansea. They were operating in Merthyr and Rhondda and Taff. But, you know, because this was only a 6-month pilot that we were looking at initially, and we had experience of working with the company, we basically entered into talks and, you know, discussions with them directly, because we had no experience of the other business. So, you know, in short, no, we haven't explored the market as yet, but I think it's principally because of the short term that we've been running the pilot. And, you know, if we were to enter into any sort of longer term agreements, you know, and the sort of guidance from yourselves, then obviously I think we would explore the market a lot more. I think, you know, talking about other local authorities throughout the UK and their experiences of dealing with these sort of environmental offences, you know, it is a two-pronged approach of education and enforcement, I think, you know, primarily, and an efficient cleansing team. There's different models, as Dave has touched on, really, as far as enforcement is concerned. You know, it's either in-house. I think it's a mix of what we do in Blaen y Gwent, you know, where we have control over those certain members of staff because we're paying them an hourly rate, and, you know, or no enforcement at all, really. But you know, what we're trying to achieve is ultimately a sustainable model that gives us an element of control about the type of enforcement we're doing, but it also makes it as cost neutral as it can be for the taxpayer as well.
Thank you. And Councillor Thomas has indicated next.
Dave, just popular areas where dog walkers go, like the Broken Lake, for example, you've got specific exclusion zones where the dogs can't walk on. Are we looking at anything where perhaps we could provide like a dog park, where it's an actual fenced-off area where dogs can you know, run freely? There's a couple of benches here, perhaps an actual park for you know, dogs to run freely.
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's two answers to it, really. There's two parts to my answer. The first part is there's nothing in the legislation we enforce that enables us, as if you like a regulatory service, to be able to create the dog park part of it. If one was to be created, then obviously we could say that it's you know, the dog fouling order would apply, and people have to cleanse it properly and to take things like that. But I think they're a great idea. I think the common dog parks are common in Australia and America, really, aren't they?
My advice to members, is that we've been asked this a few times, is really, is there any land that's identifiable? And then we go to our own estates department and say, look, could this be the potential to be a dog park? And is there a budget to create, to put a fence around it, to look at best practice of the creation of these areas and to try to create one, really? But it's not something that, as far as I'm aware, that requires legislation to create one. There may be planning issues, I don't know, but certainly that is the advice I would give to members about that. And I think they are a good idea.
Thank you, Dave. And Councillor Evans has indicated next.
Yeah. We need to cut this out really by education and prevention, which was previously stated. Have we thought about visiting the schools and targeting the young people to start this process off? Because the young people, a lot of, particularly with dogs or litter, I mean, the dogs are usually their pets. So, I mean, should we start with the youth and perhaps they can educate the older people? So.
Yeah, great question, and one which I'd like to think that schools are doing that anyway, but and I'm sure a lot of them are. My wife's a teacher, and this has been a webcast, so I have to make sure that I say that, really. But I think that most kids do leave school and they understand it. I think the education system is there. I don't think any of us, when we get to 16, 17 or 18, actually don't know that it's illegal to drop litter, or that at least it's wrong. I think we all know that we should clean up the dog mess after the dog and that sort of thing. So I think you're right about schools. I think the older population, we can promote enforcement, we can promote health issues. But, you're right about the schools, that's where the answer is. It isn't something that we're resourced to currently do. Again, I'd ask members to consider what the educational curriculum is saying, that they do a lot of environmental stuff. They do, whether it's specific around dog mess and things like that. We have done. We've had times in the past in the other authority many years ago where we bought not public protection but environmental services we're having posters put on billboards about the effect of the potential for blindness in young children as a result of handling dog mess and things like that. I think it's commonly known, and I think schools do a good job of whether they're doing it specifically in relation to dog mess issues. I can't tell you, but it's not something that we're resourced to do. And if we wanted to go on an active campaign, I'm sorry to say, I know I sound like a broken record, but it is a resources issue. I don't know if Steve's aware if there's any campaigns from the other parts of environmental services in relation to this.
Chair, with the Liberty Chair, I'm picking up on a few points. That's one of the points I picked up on. If I could come in at the end, just to add some information to the questions that have been asked, I'd be grateful. Thanks.
Sorry, Chair, can I just add to that? We have, up in Blaenau, we have had requests of schools, particularly where they've had issues with the dinner time breaks. Aberdeen Comprehensive, for example, is quite close to the town centre, and we're having a lot of problems with the kids going out of the town centre, coming back, leaving trails of litter all the way back to the school. So we were approached directly by the headmaster, and we did, a couple of our enforcement officers did go down to an assembly, did address the school directly, talk about the enforcement. And whilst we don't issue the juveniles, we certainly, we can stop and take their details and to write to their parents. So we have, where there's a specific school that may be a problem in the area, then, we certainly can, if we approach the schools, if they notify us, we can come in and do an educational talk to them. But it is a kind of one-off sort of educational talk as opposed to a long-term part of the curriculum.
We need to start the process somewhere. So if we start with the young, it'll filter hopefully through the family.
Thank you, Councillor Jones.
I was just going to ask, are you aware of any negative publicity or feedback about this partner organisation that we've used for this, to sort this out, from other areas of the country or from the media?
Yes. There was the panorama, which was poorly timed for us trying to get this going. We did make some inquiries as a result of that. And one thing that sticks in, I think there was issues in Wrexham and then they were in some of the London boroughs. And we did inquire about those. I think in each of the cases where there was something to do with peaches or oranges or orange peel, something like that, as I remember, I'm given to understand that those tickets were rescinded. And, you know, there are examples where it's going too far. Whether that's going too far or not, if it's accidentally dropped or purposely dropped, I don't know. If it's purposely dropped, I don't think it is. But if it's accidentally dropped, perhaps that there is a case. One of the burning questions I took away from that is that an officer was hidden cameras and he was talked about a target of 20 tickets a day. Okay, now that's what I remember from the panorama. And that was of concern because we don't operate that way. So I came back and I looked at the figures we've got for Blaenau Gwent and I had a look at that and I thought, well, you know, let's look at the number we've issued then, if that is realistic. And that may be normal practice in a London borough to actually serve them because of the crowd of people and a lot of litter dropping going on there. But I looked at our figures then that we had in Blaenau Gwent, and Andrew mentioned the figure earlier, 16 to 1700. And I calculated that down to 50 weeks a year, 5 days a week. And it turned out to be about an average of 6 a day. So I wasn't as concerned by that as far as our local situation was concerned. So, yes, there was a lot of bad publicity, and yes, you know, hidden cameras and taped conversations and all that. But we did inquire with some of those. I think a lot of the officers who were shown didn't work for the organisations anymore. And you know, we were a little bit more. I was a little bit more, or a lot more, reassured when I went and looked at the stats for Blaenau Gwent.
Could I just add to that then, that I have heard of a person, this is second hand I've heard this, who was issued with a dog fine for fouling, and his dog fouled, he got his black bag out of his pocket, this is what I've been told, he bent down, he picked it up, and as he was going to a bin, he got the fine for walking over a non-dog area, but he was putting his dog poo in the bin. And that to me seemed a little bit heavy-handed if it's as I was told.
Yeah, I am aware of that one. The simple fact was the gentleman took his dogs onto a pitch, which is an exclusion area. You know, if we had to be consistent in the way we enforce the dog control orders and the offence of littering, then an offence is an offence. And I think if the officer hadn't issued the fixed penalty notice in that instance, then an individual who had received a ticket would seen that occur would probably have very good grounds to complain that the organisation wasn't being consistent. So, you know, I just like to say enforcement isn't easy.
And there's the issue of signage as well, isn't it? And that goes back to the disability stuff and all that. Well, if the signage wasn't good, I mean, I know it hasn't been upheld in his case, he's had to pay the fine, but he was actually having good intentions to put the dog mess away, and whether he was aware of the signage or not, I don't know. It's poor signage, perhaps he wasn't aware.
I've spoken to the officer and he's assured me the signage was adequate in that area, and you know, he's been instructed not to assess the signage before he patrols an area, and where it isn't appropriate, not to enforce and to notify us so we can ensure the signage is correct. As I was going to say, enforcement isn't easy. You know, you're talking about Kingdom as an organisation. They're doing enforcement in about 30 local authorities nationally at the moment. Now, if you times that by thousands and thousands of fixed penalty notices they must be issuing annually. The Panorama programme identified 3 or 4 problematic cases. I'm sure if you looked at police forces throughout the UK, you could identify dozens and dozens of problematic cases. So taking enforcement and witnessing offences and taking these people to court and issuing fixed penalty notices, you're in conflict all the time with these individuals, and a certain percentage of these individuals are very forceful and will push back on whatever type of enforcement you try to impose upon them. But, you know, we'd be robust. We're robust in our approach with enforcement, as I'm sure members would want us to be if we to tackle these offending behaviour and reduce the problem in the area. So, you know, it comes with its difficulties, I think it's fair to say.
I appreciate that. I think Wheel Clamp has found that as well. But I also feel that we need perhaps more education to go alongside that, and more, you know, look at the impact on disability a little bit more carefully and on vulnerable people.
I totally agree with the education. We used to have a full-time clean and tidy officer, didn't we, years ago back in Blaenau Gwent, and it was his full-time job. He used to interact with the schools. He'd organise trips out with the kids. And I was always touched by a woman who's about 15 years ago. She came to me and she was talking about staff who used to work in environmental health. And she said, I always remember Aaron Jones came into the school when I was a kid. It's always stuck in my brain about the littering, and when you hear those stories about how that message stays with people all the way through their adult life, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and again, I think I referred to this in the report, just really to reiterate what Andrew said. Actually, the complaints, you know, our experience of this is that as members and as the local authority, we want to have a tough approach to these offences, and we fully understand that when we get an outraged individual constituent on the phone, it's quite compromising for members, and it's, you know, and there is a difficulty in you know, one time have you committed the offence, and the other time they're probably putting pressure on members and making certain allegations or raising certain issues with you, and you know, we do try and deal with them as even-handedly as we can. And at the time of writing the report, we'd only had 10 that had been escalated up to us, and the local authority has got a high payment rate. So there is something going on, and so something's working, and a lot of people are accepting the offences, and it comes back to that policy position that we want to take as a local authority around the fact that we spend £2.5 million a year cleaning the streets. We have orders in place, but really these are bylaws. These are orders in place to say dog fouling, and we're putting forward across the issue that we've got taking a zero tolerance approach. But then we've had 3 years of no enforcement, and we're trying to reintroduce it at the last at the request of the last reincarnation of this scrutiny, and with the agreement of the executive member at the time, and we are doing that. The issue then is, I think, for the local authority is, right, do we want the stuff that can be more challenging at times and the issues, but we might get that affordable in the end as a result of the models that we can put in place and that we've had success with elsewhere. It's not all rosy where we've had success elsewhere. We get challenges on a daily basis. You know, there are still those cases. They will always happen. And we will never really catch everybody. It's as much about the presence of the patrols and making an example of those who we do commit the offences, and especially the ones who we prosecute, because we can publicise those. And it's how we want to do that. Do we want it to be cost neutral, or do we want to take a different approach, which unfortunately would require quite a significant growth item on the revenue budget? So those are the choices. Or the other choice is to say, look, you know, we'll just clean it up and we'll just stick with cleansing, and then we need to make a decision about the dog exclusion areas that we've got here at the moment. That's really the issue, because the message we get as officers is when we go to the clean and green workshops and we're looking at the strategy, and this is a corporate priority for the local authority, but it's challenging and there's a journey to go through, and we need a clear steer, I think, from scrutiny today, and then from the executive member we'll make our recommendations as to what the authority wants to do about this, given the current financial challenges as well. Thank you.
And Councillor Haller is next.
Yes, I was wondering if you're aware of the Green Dog Walkers. It was started in Torfaen in, I believe, April 2015. Fiona Ford, who was a countryside access officer for Torfaen at the time, started it up. She did various talks locally. It was well supported. There was a good uptake. It's the kind of thing we should be pushing. When your dog wears a certain coloured lead, people know that they can go up to you and get a doggy bag off you if you haven't got one. It's the kind of thing we should be promoting. Have you liaised at all with the group?
You spoke to them.
Yeah, I can't remember what was discussed, to be honest with you.
I think that person you've referred to is still a council employee, and we've dealt with her on other issues, and we'll certainly. I think that's been mentioned to us when we met the executive member a couple of weeks ago, and we'll certainly follow that up.
I mean, they must still be interested in it because they flagged up the fact that there's a meeting today by us on their Facebook page.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay, and it's certainly an avenue we'll follow up. Thanks for that. I just wanted to say one more thing is as far as promotion is concerned, at ward level, the public health staff that have been here for a while have done a few bits and bobs, especially with in certain areas. They've gone out and done some promotional work where they've actually they've gone out on I can't remember the area, was it Coed I'm not sure, but they've gone out on a school walk. That's often where people walk the dogs to school, and there's often some fouling left there, and they've sprayed and put flags on, and really one day, and they did it last year, they identified a real, half a ton almost, I'm exaggerating, but you know what I'm saying, of the stuff on the ground there. And the Kingdom officer as it is at the moment, I gave him a box of poop scoop bags and said, hand those out. And we, try and make it a bit sweeter and advisable, hand them out as you go in when you see a dog walker who hasn't committed an offence. And I think he said in his report he'd done that, but most people have got their own. Most people are, with the dog walks, they are compliant. Another example of what we did where we've not done it here yet, but we've done it elsewhere, is we bought some stubbies. We had some money from the health board and we bought some stubbies. They're like little sort of inflammable plastic pouches that you can stub your cigarette out in. And we had the Kingdom officers handing those out in the town centres when they were patrolling for litter as well. Not just when they witnessed an offence, but when they were seeing people smoking as well, really, to promote it. So it is enforcement oriented. It is zero tolerance, but we can try and do some bits and bobs. And as Andrew said earlier, I wasn't aware of the talk at the secondary school. Was that by the Kingdom officers or by the other enforcement officers?
I think
Mark and Chris.
Rob was present there,
right.
but the enforcement officers.
Yeah. Okay. So that wasn't the Kingdom officers who did that. That was a combination of them and the other local authority and enforcement officers as well. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions or comments? I have a few sort of comments and questions, if you don't mind. I've had a number of councillors have a chat to me, knowing that this was coming onto the agenda, onto a committee that they don't sit on. There are grave concerns among many members about the targeting of litter, and the data sort of backs that up. I know that the directive from the previous committee was very much on dog fouling, and the stats don't support that in its entirety. There seems to have been an awful lot of the tickets are litter related. Some of the other concerns raised are very much around, we seem to be targeting high footfall areas, and the data supports that too. And that's concern. Enforcing on large privately owned areas, there is a train of thought that I think most of the members here support, is that we should be looking for some sort of contribution to the costs, because yes, I understand your strategic with that. However, the general public only see us enforcing in supermarkets and big shopping developments, and that doesn't sit comfortable with a number of people. There's a couple of questions really that I've got. Just for clarity though, how much of the ticket money comes back to the authority?
under the current pilot, it's retained by Kingdom because initially, if you recall, we had the 15,000 for 2 days a week, and then in that case, if that would have been the agreement, then any income from offences would have been retained, would have been sent back and retained by the local authority. But because they went to 5 days to try to have a greater presence for more days a week, and I think from their point of view it would help them employ people as well if it's full time. But to have a greater presence for us as well, we gave a report which gave the option of option B, if you like, which is the one we went with, and that was agreed.
Okay, so we have at the moment we have one officer that we pay £15,000 a year for into Kingdom, and they retain all of the fine money, the ticket money.
But we had 2 officers. One's gone and there's not been replaced at this point in time. So, and we've wanted him to focus on, since the other officer left, we've wanted him to focus on dog-related issues solely. Okay, so that's what's happened. So in order to do that, we've agreed that that means that, as we've seen from the stats, that he will not be serving as many fixed penalty notices, and he hasn't done since then. But he's been patrolling more, and so as a result, we agreed for the remainder of the pilot that he would stay full time rather than for the 15,000. In other words, we're paying him to patrol. Less tickets are issued, but the current arrangement is when the fines come in, the current arrangement is still that it's retained by Kingdom, although those would have reduced.
Okay, then moving on from that, my comment really is that it's a shame that we don't have those statistics here, because for me it would be important to see that that target is taking place, because earlier on in the conversation you mentioned that there's 6 tickets a day on average issued.
That was when I reflected on the Panorama one, and that was the Blaenau Gwent rate last year.
Do you have any idea of the number that we are issuing per day or per week in the borough? So they're already generating tickets of £300 then. £500 one a day. £2,000 a month they're generating in just one a day. That's a substantial amount of money that they are collecting with just one officer. If that is, am I getting that correct then? Yeah. Anyway, that's my comment.
Because you could argue that their costs actually are not fully covered with the remainder of the 15,000 for 5 days a week. So, we haven't done those calculations. So, I think and not all of those fines would have been paid.
And I follow that. However, what I am sort of indicating really is that there is, just on even that reduced number of tickets from August to October, with the targeted, you're still saying 1 ticket a day, £100, 500 a week, 2,000 a month. That's a substantial amount of money that enforcement officer is generating for his company. On top of that, we're paying them £15,000 to do that. There needs to be a different model in place if that is the recommendation going forward, in my opinion. I will go on to my questions, though. Apologies for that, I'm a bit of a number cruncher.
Okay.
In point 5.1, you request that additional funding should be made available to continue with the enforcement patrols. Am I assuming that is you want £15,000 the £15,000 to continue, or are you asking for more? And will this funding, moving forward, if agreed, would it still only cover the one Kingdom officer?
I think that's for discussion, really, with the executive member and any recommendations from the committee today as well. The 15,000, sorry if this is repeating it, it initially covered 2 officers, this is the initial plan, for 2 days a week, with any offence income coming back into the local authority and being retained there. So if we stayed with 1, that would cover him for 4 days a week. 1 officer 4 days a week, and that would be the 15,000 spent. So this goes back to your previous point, is actually he's got the pro rata of 15,000 for 5 days a week at the moment, and that's what we agreed. But I don't want to go back. So we need to then basically, if the funding is made available, then we need to consider whether, if it's 15,000, whether we want to do litter and dog fouling, as we've done for the majority of the pilot so far, with the current arrangements, or we want to solely target dog fouling, in which case we would still only get the officers for that first 2 days a week, as was initially
Okay.
planned. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
Yeah.
But my concern there then is that if we are not able to know how much extra funding as a committee is needed, or if it remains at the 15,000, whether it's for 1 officer or 2 officers, it makes it very difficult for us to form an opinion and a recommendation on data that's not available to us.
I understand that. The initial plan, again, was 15,000 for 2 officers, 2 days a week, patrolling the borough, with income coming back into the local authority. So if we want to solely target on dog fouling and have the income coming back into the local authority, then if we want 15,000, we'll buy 2 officers for 2 days a week. So if we want them 4 days a week, then it would be 30,000, and it would increase pro rata for 5 days as well. Alternatively, we could stick with the model now, where we can get 2 officers for 15,000 for litter and dog fouling offences. Okay.
In 7.7.2, there appears to be a lot of activity in the south compared to the north. Why?
Again, I think that is because that is the higher from the stats we've seen. I appreciate the concerns about how they've been presented regionally. I think the majority, that's where the higher populations are. The majority of them have been in the Cumbrian area. There has been a lot of litter offences in the southern part of the borough. We know that a significant number of those were around the shopping centre, and also around some of the parklands that there was also. So it's the higher populated areas, the areas where people are during the day or at hotspot times.
I footfall, yeah. And what are the main reasons associated with people's fines being written off or cancelled?
People's
fines being written off or cancelled.
Well, it's each case on its merits, really, isn't it? I think again, I don't deal with these on a... It is some indication there in the table in 7.9.2, where obviously there's been some medical issues cancelled by the local authorities, usually where we've been involved, and we've looked at a case, and I gave the example of the cricket pitch earlier where the signage wasn't adequate. That was one that I dealt with, so that was rescinded. And Andrew, do you want to come in with any further examples of the reasons that the fines were rescinded?
You're right, most of them are because of medical grounds, either mental or physical infirmity. We do review any new evidence that might come to light as well that might question the officer's interpretation or decision in relation to the offence itself. So, but the vast majority are because of medical grounds, really.
And my last is really a comment, really, relating to the cameras that the enforcement officer wears. And this is going back to the previous a number of years ago, and I think you might even know a bit about this one, because yes, there may not be aggression shown on there, but there can be some form of passive-aggressive behaviour that I've witnessed myself in a car park where two officers, without saying a word, stood at the front and the rear of somebody's vehicle to stop them moving away. Now that to me is not, however, not verbally aggressive, it's quite a passive-aggressive stance. And I'd be very uncomfortable if that situation or anything similar like that arose again, because you wouldn't have caught that on a body camera, one at the front of a vehicle, one at the back.
I'd just say to talk about the enforcement officers and the job they have to do, really. If they weren't robust in their dealing with these individuals, then you may as well not do any enforcement at all, because whilst most people are compliant and they will comply with the officer's request for information, there's a significant minority who are abusive, physically threatening, will not provide any information at all. Now, officers need to be firm in those situations to obtain that information eventually on the identity of the offender, so that the whole system remains robust and sustainable, and there's faith in the public and that we are able to do the enforcement that we do. I constantly see Section 9 statements provided by officers, constantly review CCTV footage from body cams, and the abuse, both physical and intimidatory behaviour from members of the public towards these officers, you've got to see to believe, actually, and I think they do one of the hardest jobs in the local authority. And I know, as members, you've got to you show care and caution about the way officers representing the organisation behave, but these guys are really pushed 10, 15 times a day by members of the public, and they do a very, very difficult job, and that's why I give them 100% support.
Thank you for that. And I'm also, with the shoe on the other foot, we also have a responsibility to anyone that we employ or subcontract to, and it concerns me that we may be putting somebody in that sort of jeopardy,
It is. There is a high turnover of staff, actually, in comparison to other local authority jobs. It's a challenging job, and that they move on, and that's pretty. It's a pretty common occurrence, and it needs to be expected. And it's probably one of the most difficult jobs you've got. If you compare it to parking, if you say like the old traffic warden type job, well, they'll turn up when the person isn't there, and they'll to take a ticket, and they'll issue a ticket to a vehicle. They don't necessarily have to converse with the individual and obtain information from them. And obviously, Andrew's already touched on the abuse. So there's absolutely no doubt, Chair, what you've said there isn't as it was, but it is the minority of cases. We're pretty sure of that, and as Andrew said, we have to stick by them. They have the most difficult job that I certainly wouldn't want to do it anyway. I wouldn't want to approach people in that way. But a lot of them go about it very professionally. They're used to dealing with aggression, and so you get the odd big bloke who may have been a doorman in the evening elsewhere, but they're trained, they're licensed to do that. And we've had a couple of ex-policemen as well, and I think we've had a couple of people who used to be in the armed force as well, who were very assertive without being aggressive. So I'm always pleased when especially the ex-policeman comes on, who are used to dealing with the confrontation. But it is a challenging job, and we do have a high turnover staff, and we have to support them. Thank you, Chair.
We've received a number of comments on Facebook, and I think it's quite important that we read some of these out, because I'd like to thank the members of the public actually for engaging on Facebook with us. It really is important, and I think that it should be noted. Our thanks should be noted, and that we should be reading them out and listening and including them in our deliberations. So I'll just read a few out. I mean, there were quite pages and pages of them. A lady called Lynn, I won't read out surnames. 2 instances of dog fouling, not good enough. I could show you at least 2 a day where I live. Richard, he says he got done a year ago for a cigarette butt, which he took on the chin, because he shouldn't have done it. But what annoyed him was that it was in a McDonald's car park. Why is someone who is employed by the council keeping a private company's car park tidy? Then we know another one, a Reese. The enforcement officer needs to be employed by the council, not by a profit-making third-party company. A lady called Vicky. I'm pretty sure that there have been more than 2 fines issued in Torfaen for dog fouling. Well, according to a popular Torfaen dog site, there have been more. If it really is only 2 people have been fined, then this system is clearly not working. Sorry, but another waste of public funds by TCBC. So there are quite a number there, and I could go on and on and on, but I won't. But I'd like to thank the members of the public for engaging. We have all had these distributed to us, and all members of the committee have read them, and they make very interesting and very good reading, so thank you for that. I'd like to invite Steve to his comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of comments I've sort of thought of and picked up on during discussions, and thank you to you, Chair, for allowing me to make these. I think the enforcement on the private land issue is an important one. Dave made reference to strategic thoughts about the private land that we could enforce on. I'm not steeped in environmental health and public protection as my colleagues are here, so when the thought, or when the discussion took place about enforcement on private land, I guess my thoughts were similar to what some of the members have had here around the table today, is why are we doing, or why are people not contributing? And I think it'll be useful for the committee, if you're so minded, to perhaps to press that a little bit more in your response. But I think what we're trying to do here, in my discussions with colleagues, is affect behaviour change. So if people are dropping litter on private land, they're dropping litter, and Dave made the point that litter doesn't stay where it's dropped; it also goes on to other areas. So I think there's a case to be made that there is serving a useful function if we look at private land. But I certainly accept the point that can there be contributions toward it, and how much should we target it? But in terms of affecting behavioural change and ensuring consistency across the county borough, where members who've served for a while will no doubt be aware of issues of inconsistency between areas of publicly held land and privately held land, and sometimes the inapparent difference to members of the public on that land, which then causes an inconsistency sort of concern. So I'm happy the members have picked that up, and we'll be discussing that after, I'm sure. In terms of just the wheel clamping issue, just wanted to pick up that I dare say that was on private land. We enforce in car parks, our own off-street car parks, but we don't employ any wheel clamping contractors. So I just wanted to ensure that was known. In terms of the hotspot areas, certainly Councillor Thomas, in terms of affecting, being able to highlight it by ward. That's not able to be done at the moment, but the questions are being asked. But I'm sort of fairly comfortable with the hotspot areas, known both from discussions with members and in terms of how the officers and how the contractor has been operating. So I think we're aware of the hotspot areas, we're just not able to tie them towards, as you're aware of, as we were discussing. In terms of bins, certainly take that point that easy way of disposing. The easier we can make it to dispose of dog waste, the easier, or perhaps the more compliance we're going to get from the dog walking public. And I probably share your frustrations that it seems a strange thing to do for someone to go to the effort of picking up their waste, and then that waste not ending up in an appropriate bin. Be that a bin close to where they are, or be that their residual waste that they can take that waste home and sort out in their own residual waste. Just picking up on the education in schools issue, we certainly go into schools from a waste and recycling point of view. I couldn't tell you the exact sort of curriculum of that, but I'm sure that littering would be picked up as part of that discussions within the schools where we aim to educate our young people in waste and recycling more generally. Yeah, and just in terms of the costs issue then, I think the original decision that members made related to wanting to carry out this enforcement activity was based around £15,000 for 6 months. Dave picked up on a couple of scenarios that could be looked at, but my feeling would be that we would likely be pitching the costs at the same sort of arena that members originally considered. So in terms of if we were to extend the pilot for another 6 months, my thought would be whatever we ended up with in terms of method of operation, that we would be looking at a council contribution of around £15,000. Thank you, Chair. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. And there's just one other, apologies, there's just one other thing. We seem to have targeted businesses and asking them for, moving forward, perhaps we should be asking them. But there are RSLs in this borough that own substantial parts of public or previously public land. We should also be looking to them to be contributing, because if we're enforcing on land that's now owned by a registered social landlord, we should also be looking to them maybe, as well as businesses, etc. So there is another course we could look at. So I'd like to thank officers, Dave, Steve, etc. for attending our committee. I'd please ask you to depart so that our committee can make its recommendations, formulate our recommendations. But thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, members.
Thank you, members. So I'll just sort of remind you really what we are considering and what we are coming up with as far as recommendations. In the agenda, we've been asked that the committee have been invited to assess the outcomes of the environmental pilot to date and make comments on the alternative options on whether the authority should make additional fundings available to continue the enforcement patrols beyond the end of October for a further 6 to 12 months, subject to procurement rules, or until a new comprehensive and sustainable enforcement strategy is developed and implemented. So, can I have your thoughts and opinions on this? We can formulate some sort of recommendation. Councillor Evans, yeah?
Picking up on what the officer said, it would be 35,000 per officer if we employed it in-house. Now, if we had Kingdom, it would be 15,000. That's for one. So, what I'm thinking is, if we did go due to the cost, recommended for the cost with Kingdom, then we'd have to stipulate what type of, what we needed doing within the walls, rather than them just targeting certain things on there.
We've actually done that.
Yeah.
That's what we did 18 months ago.
Yeah.
We actually told them what exactly we wanted them to do, where we wanted them to do it, and they've done exactly the opposite. All they've done is gone out thinking, the council is paying me, or this company, £15,000 so we can go out and make an awful lot more money for doing next to nothing. So we've already been through that process.
That's the option.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
My recollection of this enforcement is that it was agreed the 15,000 for the trial period with a focus on dog mess. For me, the stats don't back up that directive, and a number of members that don't sit on this committee have pointed that out and have been quite verbal in the fact that the directive that they gave, some of them sat on the committee at the time of that direction, and they're very disappointed that hasn't happened. Any other comment?
I'd like to recommend that they look elsewhere, not just Kingdom, because the residents have no confidence in Kingdom whatsoever because of the very, the panorama and so forth.
Yeah.
And I don't accept that Kingdom are the only company that are willing to do this. There must be others out there, even if it's private individuals.
I just wonder why it has to be at a certain level that they do this if we did it in-house. I'm sure if they sort of looked outside the box and did the relevant training, they could employ somebody similar to how Kingdom has done it, and we could do it more successfully and more humanely than perhaps Kingdom has.
The reason that I was attempting to get down to the money bit for me is that if we are just on the August to October when the officer went down to 1 and directed only at dog mess, based on just 1 ticket a day, that's £500 a week, it's £2,000 a month. That's a lot of money just on a very targeted dog mess that would come into the authority. So we would have the £35,000 cost if we bought it in-house, but we wouldn't have the £15,000 outgoing or £30,000 outgoing for a year, and we'd also then be in receipt of that £500 a week income off the fines. So for me there is an argument that if we do recommend that this control order or this is pursued, should we be recommending that it is brought in-house, because the evidence suggests that financially that would stack up, but that's just my very basic, numbers crunching.
I was going to say I completely agree with you, Councillor Haynes. I think.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo that, I mean, I personally think we should be looking to bring it in-house. Not just that, because these littering and dog fouling is very sensitive, and it's our reputation as well. So I think just on that alone, we should be seriously considering looking at doing it in-house, purely because like I said, it's our reputation.
Councillor Hawley, yeah.
I'd also agree it should be brought in-house. We'd have far more control over the person that you employ in the beginning. I mean, it was stated that an ex-police officer would make a good person for this role. Well, we would be able to choose such a person for that role. Yeah. We wouldn't have to rely on a third party coming in and dictating who is doing the job for us, and we'd have far more control, full stop.
Yeah.
When I asked him about had he looked at what other local authorities are doing, he didn't actually answer me.
That's right.
He was very vague. In other words, he said, well, we looked in Blaenau Gwent, and he had seen everything he is interested in is what happens in Blaenau Gwent. Surely they could look across the whole of the UK what other authorities are doing and look at the best practice there is.
On with the panorama, I mean, the documentary that I was on with where our money is being spent, they targeted a local authority in England, and part of that report was about the dog fouling and the fines. So it's not just the one, it's on the agenda for lots of things. There seems to be a lot of negativity about some of the companies that use this. Anyone else have comments? I think that was rather quick. I think that was,
If it come in house, if it comes in house and you start fining people through Torvine, does that cost a lot of money for the legal side of it?
my understanding, and I could be wrong, my understanding is that when they're prosecuting, that's coming in-house to be done anyway. So if that cost is already being incurred by the local authority. So I think that there wouldn't be a difference in that, if my understanding of what the officer said is correct. And sort of what I'm already very quickly getting is that our recommendation moving forward is that we should look to bring it in-house for reputational reasons.
Even though we said about 15,000 for the Kingdom for 6 months, like you previously said, if it's a year with somebody in-house, that's 30,000 already. You know, and it just proves it, you know, if you're going to bring one in-house. You know, all the other costs are covered through the prosecution, you know.
I think if we bring it in-house, we are then seen to be proactive.
Yeah.
We are then in complete control of it, not a private company deciding where they go, when they go there.
Yeah. this person should be seen wherever they employ, because you need a van, bright red, glowing, and people that it needs to be seen in the borough, all throughout the borough.
Leanne, so is there any sort of summing up that you would like to pick up on that? I think it's been quite straightforward, actually.
It has, actually. I didn't think it was going to be, but on your latest sort of recommendation, I'm going to feel that the committee, you're overall recommending that you extend the scheme, subject to, now these are a few other points that a lot of you members brought out throughout the meeting, so you can still tell me now whether you think they're relevant. I think Councillor Evans, you mentioned this at the beginning, a review to be undertaken on all signage throughout the borough, clearly indicating dog control order areas, as concern has been expressed that these signs are too high. Is that still applicable now? Yeah, as a recommendation. Councillor Evans again. Explore working in collaboration with community groups like Paws on Patrol, I think you said.
So you said Paws, you said dog clubs.
Councillor Hall has said Green Dog Walkers.
Yeah, I'm going to come on later to that. That's right, I got that a bit later on. To gain intelligence on offenders and to help spread the word on local authorities' zero tolerance approach. I think you used those sort of words. Councillor Mills, can we explore with private landlords, and I think the Chair expanded on that later on in the meeting, and RSLs, for them contributing to the scheme, and I think you had backup from Steve on that, so yes. You felt that was quite important. Consider, I think this was you, Councillor Jones, consider carrying out a disability impact assessment on the environmental enforcement scheme. And you felt that that was important. Councillor Evans again, I think this was, education and prevention is key to changing behaviours. Consideration to be made by the executive member for officers to go into schools and give talks to children on littering. Not quite sure how possible that is in the environment we're in at the moment.
Well, think about that actually, with young people, the parents usually buy the dog or cat, and ask them to walk them to get potty milk for the week. And that's what I was trying to push, that they can educate young people about dog fowl as well as litter. And it goes through to the parents and the grandparents.
Yes. Explore working or liaising with Fiona Ford on, was it re-establishing the Green Dog Walker scheme?
I think the council currently backs the Green Dog Walker scheme.
It's a current scheme.
I think we should push it more proactively.
It's a current scheme.
Yeah.
It is a current scheme.
I mean,
but it needs backing. Yeah.
To
you, well done.
And my dog.
All right.
Just me.
The dogs are loose.
I think there's a great consensus in consideration to be given to not just patrolling high footfall areas, but other areas within the borough. Obviously, they'll have to obtain intelligence. So if you know, as ward members, where the problems are, you might need to get in contact.
I think added to that is they need to listen to the list that they will supply.
Yeah, I think the point I was trying to make is they asked us to identify the areas. We did that, but they totally ignored that and went elsewhere.
Yeah.
Are we recommending that they look for a different enforcement team, or are we recommending that we bring it in-house?
In-house.
So could we change that, Leanne, to that our recommendation is that it be brought in-house? Thank you very much for that, members. I didn't think it was going to be quite as easy as it turned out to be, but I'm very pleased that we're all on the same page with that. We've very much got agenda item 5, which is the item for the next meeting. That item is now, it was going to be third on the agenda, I believe, but it's being brought forward, the draft housing strategy, because the dog inclusion order has to be dropped because of a consultation exercise. So that will be coming back to us, but at a slightly later date. And then just agenda item 6 is closing the meeting. The date of the next meeting is the 13th of December. And I'd like to thank you all for attending. Thank you very much.